Hey, Shalom, Makim, Shalom. First and foremost, as always, I would like to give all praise, all honor, and all glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rachakodash. Double honors to the apostles, bishops, and elders of Great Millstone that taught us this truth and also teaching this truth, and much peace, love, and salutation to the elect, beginning with the 144,000, all the way down to the large multitude that believes, and who the Lord will deliver in these last days. To you all I say Shalom. I'm the brother Tazamah from the Great Millstone Dallas camp, coming back today with another lesson, and I pray this lesson will be edifying to the elect. And I want to do a quick lesson on the breaking news that you see here. I seen this on endtimeheadlines.com, and as you see, the title says U.S. seizes Navy destroyer after blowing a hole through it for trying to break Hormuz blockade. All right, it says U.S. seizes Navy destroyer after blowing a hole through it for trying to break Hormuz blockade. Now, the news that came out on Friday was that, the Strait of Hormuz has officially been opened up, for traffic and, for any vessel, so that was the breaking news on Friday, and Trump was pretty much saying that, which is all lies. Other news came out some hours later that same day, indicating that that DJ Trump pretty much was lying. He pretty much did 7 lies in 1 hour, and seven's in the, as a number of completion, and that's what this devil does. The scripture says, those words be softer than oil, yet were they drawn swords, so that's what this devil, Esau has a track record of, saying one thing and then completely doing the opposite. He did that with the northern tribes that was here in the Americas, all the treaties that they established, and he broke every single last one of them. The scripture says, never trust thine enemy. As a lot, though he humbled himself and go crouching. Matter of fact, let me just grab it real quick. And this whole little ceasefire between Iran and America, as well as Lebanon and Israel, which pretty much Israel also came out and said that they're gonna start striking Lebanon again. This whole little ceasefire situation is all theater of war. But it's really giving time for both sides really just to rearm, to pretty much rearm themselves, because this war, all right, is not going to stop. It's just going to continue to escalate. The scripture says that that there is no peace, saith the Lord, unto the wicked. I think it's in Isaiah the 49th chapter, if I'm not mistaken. There's no peace to the wicked. In another scripture, it says what? When they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them as a woman in travail. So there's not going to be any kind of peace to the Middle East, as they've been saying. The board of, Donald J. Trump and the board of peace. We're looking for peace in the Middle East, all that madness. All right, that's not going to happen. Okay, the only time that there's going to be peace in the world, all right, is whenever Yahweh Shai HaMashiach returns. The scripture says, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice, but when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. Okay, so that's going to be the only time whenever there's peace on the earth. And I'm quoting a lot of scriptures right now, as I'm in my vehicle, but it's just a lot of precepts that are coming to mind as I'm driving and as I'm talking. You can if you want, you can post these precepts in the comment board. Another precept that also just came to my mind, all right, was damn, it just escaped me. Yeah, Revelation the 6th chapter, which I'll probably get. All right, this is Sirach chapter 12, verse 10. It says, never trust thine enemy. So as they have all these peace talks and this delegate's talking to that delegate and all this other kind of madness, all right, it's all smoke and mirrors, man. They say a lot of these things in the media, in the news, to manipulate the markets, to make people think that there's going to be a ceasefire that's going to lead to pretty much a negotiations, whereas everything's going to smooth out and calm down. And let's just say that there was negotiations and things did calm down for a little bit, and the Strait of Hormuz did open back up, and all that other kind of stuff, right? At the end of the day, things are just going to continue to escalate after that to a higher level. These things have to happen, which our Lord, well, I'm gonna do another lesson later on. These things have to happen. Pretty much, we want we want this shit to fall. We need this shit to fall. The sooner this bitch falls, is the sooner the kingdom of heaven is established on the planet Earth. So the Lord is working on the minds of these particular leaders and, and military generals and, leaders, presidents, prime ministers, leaders, war generals and things of that nature to ultimately fulfill his purpose. All right. Sirach chapter 12, verse 10, it says, never trust thine enemy. It says, for like as iron rusteth, so is his wickedness. See that? It says, though he humble himself and go crouching, yet take good heed of him, yet take good heed and beware of him, and thou shalt be unto him and thou shalt be unto him as if thou hast wiped a looking glass. All right, so just imagine you have a mirror, and it's foggy. You can see the image of something, but you really can't. Like you take a shower, and you got the mirror in the bathroom. You take a hot shower. Once you come out the shower, that mirror is very, very foggy. Now you can see an outline or a form of an image, but you really can't really make out the image fully. You can't really see the details of the image, right? So it says, though he humble himself and go crouching, yet take good heed and beware of him, and thou shalt be unto him as if thou hast wiped a looking glass, and thou shalt know that his rust hath not been altogether wiped away. You see that? So his rust or his wickedness has not all been together wiped away. You see, and this devil's getting ready to show his horns on a whole nother level. On a whole nother level. You see them setting up this AI technocracy. They're getting the CBDC, the central bank digital currencies set up and established. Others, you have other pilot nations that are pretty much already on board doing it. And this is going to turn into a worldwide thing because this war, all right, is set to reset, all right, the current global system. That's what this war is all about. Which the elite are the ones that are planning, that are pulling the strings behind the scenes. You see? So it says, set him not by thee, lest when he hath overthrown thee, he stand up in thy place. You see, there was a prime example recently with the whole thing, the situation in Venezuela with Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela. Esau just came up in there by night and just completely just took him out. And now then America seized their oil. Woe unto him that heapeth unto him that which is not his, as the scripture says, right? It says, neither let him sit at thy right hand, lest he seek to take thy seat, and thou at the last remember my words and be pricked therewith. You see? So you can't trust these devils, man. Every time they talk about ceasefires and peace talks, especially the small hats, they're the true, they're the most worst pieces of shit on the planet Earth. The scriptures call them the worst of the heathen. So let's go here, right? I'm sorry. I said Revelation 6. That's what I also said. I'm gonna get that real fast because they keep talking about peace in the Middle East and peace this and ceasefire, peace talks and things of that nature, right? Yep. Revelation chapter 6, verse 3. It says, and when he had opened the second seal, I heard the second beast say, come and see. And there went out another horse that was red. And that red horse is talking about Esau. All right. When you see a horse, it represents power. If it's figuratively speaking. All right. And then what the scripture says that what Esau came out red all over like a hairy garment. And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth. You see, so power was given unto him. And what does the scripture say? It says that the earth was given into the hand of the wicked. So power has been given to Esau in these last days because he's going to be ruling in the last leg of the Roman Empire. Okay, when you read Daniel 2, Daniel 7, okay, it talks about four major empires that will rule. You have the Assyrian Neo-Babylonian Empire. All right, and then from there you had the Medes and the Persians, the Medo-Persian Empire. Then you had the Greco-Roman Empire. All right, then you had the Roman Empire, which was like Pax Romana. All right, then the fifth empire, which will be that little horn that will come back up, which is a revival of the Roman Empire. The feet of the 10 toes of iron mixed with miry clay. All right, that's the last extension of the Roman Empire, which we're in right now. And America is the whore that controls the beast. Okay, so once again it says, and there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another. And this is why you see a lot of death and destruction and bloodshed and murder taking place throughout the world. Here it is last night. You just had, I want to say, between the ages of 1 and 14, 8 children that got pretty much gunned down, which was all judgment from the Lord at the end of the day. The scripture says that whoever slain, whoever perished being innocent, I kill and I make alive, I wound and I heal. So it's really the Lord. But you had children from the ages of 1 to 14 that got put to death in Louisiana in a mass shooting last night. It says, and there was given unto him a great sword. And what was Esau's blessing? Esau's blessing was a sword, man. Okay? So now, it says, U.S. seizes Navy destroyer after blowing a hole through it for trying to break Hormuz blockade. A U.S. Navy destroyer fired on a disabled, let me read that again. A U.S. Navy destroyer fired on and disabled an Iranian-flagged cargo vessel after it attempted to push through a newly imposed maritime blockade near the Strait of Hormuz, according to statements from President Donald Trump on Sunday. So here it is, the Strait of Hormuz was so-called open back up again on Friday, but Donald Trump was pretty much like, well, even though the Strait is open, we're still going to have a Navy blockade. We're still going to impose a blockade, which, what kind of sense does that make? Letting you know that, this is all being done by Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahweh Shai ultimately for war to continue. The king's heart or his mind is in the hand of the Lord. As rivers of water, he turneth it whithersoever he will. So it's really Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahweh Shai working on these kings for them to make these particular statements and do these things to keep the powder keg lit. It says the incident took place in the Gulf of Oman, right, where the guided missile destroyer USS Sprudence intercepted the ship, identified as the Tuska US. Officials said the vessel ignored repeated warnings before the Navy took action. So, and who the hell is it for America to block, a strait that doesn't belong to them? That's why the scripture says he neither keepeth at home. Who enlarges his desire as hell, and neither keepeth at home, as it says in Habakkuk the 2nd chapter. Esau can't even control the situations that's in his own backyard, but he has a nerve to go in somebody else's backyard and control, what moves out, what can enter and what can exit. It says American forces later bombarded the disabled ship, and U.S. Marines took control of the vessel. And this is pretty much piracy. Let's actually look up the definition of piracy. All right, define piracy. Let's get the definition of piracy. It says piracy. All right, it says the practice of attacking and robbing ships at sea. And this is exactly, what America has been doing. Remember they was doing this with Venezuelan, I want to say it was Venezuelan ships. They said that they was moving drugs into the states, so that was just bombing the shit out of them. The practice of attacking and robbing ships at sea. It says a practice similar to piracy, but in other contexts, especially hijacking. And did not America do that with the Venezuelan oil? They pretty much hijacked Venezuela and took their resources, man, and called it and pretty much said, and Trump was proud about it. We have a lot of oil reserve. We have a lot of oil reserves from Venezuela. It's great. And we want to thank the Venezuelan president. We want to thank the Venezuelan president for pretty much seizing something that ain't his. And once again, Esau, this is Esau's track record. This is what he's known for doing. Okay, this is exactly what he's known. This is what he's known for. Okay, just give me 1 second. Just park my car real quick. All right, it says the unauthorized use of reproduction. Let me see that again, or read that again. The unauthorized use or reproduction of another's work. See that? And it goes back to the word. It goes back to the root word of pirate. See, from Latin, parata, from Greek, paratis, from perien to attempt, attack, and attempt. You see that? So again, it says American forces later bombarded the disabled ship and U.S. Marines took control of the vessel. Authorities are now examining both the cargo and the ship's activities, as it had previously been sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury. All right. It says the confrontation marks the first time force has been used since Washington announced a sweeping naval blockade of Iranian shipping routes earlier this month. U.S. officials have said multiple vessels were previously turned away without incident. According to Trump, the Navy acted only after the ship failed to comply with orders. Our Navy ship stopped them right in their tracks, he said, emphasizing that the operation was part of a broader effort to enforce the blockade. The move comes during a fragile pause in the hostilities between the United States and Iran, with negotiations aimed at de-escalation still underway. So, and now things are just going to escalate even more, because right now you had over the weekend, because the markets are closed on the weekend, you had gas prices went down, to roughly, I want to say per barrel, it went back down to like 80. I want to say it was like, if I'm not mistaken, like $87 a barrel or $82, one of those two. It was like $87 to $82 a barrel. So gas, the price per barrel went down, which ultimately caused gas prices to drop. You've seen like $3.32 in particular areas. So at first it was like already up to $4. Almost $5 in particular other states. But with this situation that just happened, you best believe that things are about to increase even higher. Gas is about to increase on a whole nother level. It says, and not just gas, gas, that's just one aspect of it, but it's about to be even more. All right. It says, let me read that again. It says the move comes during a fragile pause in hostilities between the United States and Iran, with negotiations aimed at de-escalation still underway. It says, however, Iran has rejected renewed talks and criticized the blockade as in violation of the ceasefire. You see that? And that is a violation of the ceasefire, because ultimately, once again, these ceasefires are set to ultimately have these militaries just pretty much reload. America was pretty much getting they was running out of Tomahawk missiles, for lack of better words, man. Their missile stock was getting low. And they was talking about putting boots on the ground even at the same time. There was like 1,000 more troops, if I'm not mistaken, that got sent out over there to Western Asia. So if they're in negotiations for peace talks, why are they still sending more troops out there? Because things are about to escalate to a whole nother level. Okay. It says the Strait of Hormuz remains one of the world's most critical shipping lanes, with a significant portion of global oil passing through it, which is roughly about like 20%. All right, it says recent actions by both sides have heightened concerns about further escalation and potential disruptions to international energy markets, which once again, Monday going into Tuesday, we're about to see the price increase all over again. And call hello Yahweh Bashim Shah for that. It says Trump has continued to press Iran to abandon its nuclear program and allow unrestricted maritime traffic through the region, warning that additional military steps could follow if diplomacy fails. But the main one that's causing diplomacy to fail is America and Israel. They'll call for a ceasefire, then Iran will quote unquote accept it or whatever the case may be. Then somebody will get bombed. Like they had the U.S. and Iran ceasefire. Then all of a sudden Israel bombed the shit out of Lebanon. It was like 100 missiles in 10 minutes. So at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, all right, these things are just going to continue to escalate, but we need these things to continue to escalate. We need this shit to happen. We need this shit to escalate. We need gas prices because at the end of the day, the Lord's the one that he's the one that's causing the gas prices to increase. He's the one that's causing the food prices to increase. He's the one that's causing all these things to happen. So if we understand and know that the Lord is the one ultimately doing it, we ultimately understand that Yahweh Bashim Shah is the same one that can also cause us to be protected and safe and cause us to eat in that time. Behold, my servant shall eat. Behold, my servant shall drink. Okay. So I just want to do a quick, lesson on this. I pray this lesson was edifying to the elect. Once again, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Hakodash, Double honors to the apostles, bishops, and elders, great millstone that taught us his truth and also teaching his truth. Much peace, love, and salutation to the elect. Until next time, Lord willing, I say shalom.